Hello everyone, thank you very much for joining me today. I am joined by local science fiction and fantasy writer and co-owner of the Secret Bookshelf and Bookshop in Carrickfergus, Joe Zebedee. You're very welcome, Joe. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Hiya, Kelly. It's lovely to be here. Nice to see you, even if it's virtually.
Yes, I know. Unfortunately, we're still in that kind of lockdown mode at the moment.
I don't think any of us expected to still be there a year later, did we?
No. So that's it. We're in another March now, and this video will go out early April. So hopefully by the time it goes out, we're over this hurdle.
Well, hopefully we'll have some dates in mind.
So, Joe, I just was wanting to speak to you about lots of things, about your books, about what's in the pipeline, and about the shop. So really, I just was wondering to begin with, last year I read a lot of science fiction, and I wouldn't normally, I would read your books because of our link with Women Aloud and being a local writer. But then I started to read, R.B. Kelly and Biddy Lee as well, and I really thought it's interesting because I never thought that I would like to read science fiction. But I'm really enjoying it. So just wondering what really inspired you to get into science fiction and fantasy in the first place?
Yeah, so I've always been a reader of sci-fi fantasy. I have 3 older brothers, and one of them would have had quite a bit sitting around on the bookshelves. One of my sort of early books that kind of took my fancy, if you like, was a Robert Heinlein, who actually wrote quite a lot of young adult sci-fi, book called Star Beast, which is about somebody who has a pet that is a space monster, and just kind of what they get up to. And then I also remember in school Gobelino the Witch's Cat being read by the teacher and being completely enthralled by this here. So even from a very early stage, I was connected with that sort of genre. Escapism, I think, is the first appeal. And then as I became a writer, I mean, I know that writing in a genre that's not that well celebrated in Northern Ireland, in fact, very poorly celebrated in Northern Ireland by the literary crowd, if you like, was a risk. And I would love to be able to come up with something that doesn't have something weird in it, and come up with something that's much more marketable. But unfortunately, when I come up with a story, it comes up with the what if. And I've been doing a lot of thought recently around what we would call the reflective mirror of science fiction, how we use science fiction to reflect themes in our own world. And I think one thing that science fiction does is give me, particularly sci-fi for the mirror, is give me the bravery to write about things perhaps that I wouldn't in a contemporary story. Not that I'm saying something terribly controversial, but just that by not directly talking about whatever it is that's inspired me, I can say more.
Right, yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, they were your influences whenever you were younger, and you always had that influence. But did you write when you were younger, or when did that really start?
I would have done bits and pieces of writing. I remember writing a very impassioned essay about them knocking down Louis MacNeice's house in Carrickfergus, which I still think was an absolutely criminal act by the local council, and replacing it with a fold, and that beautiful house in the heritage was gone. So I remember that there whenever I was at primary school. And then whenever I was at secondary school, I started to come up with the Abendau series. The Abendau is my non-Northern Irish series. It's very much a space opera, classic sort of feel to it. And those stories and whatnot I started to devise at school. And I remember after I left university going on to one of these writers courses that guarantees you'll get your money back by the end, or they'll give you it back, and they don't tell you that you've got to plow through so much writing that you don't actually want to do before you can claim that money back. Most people give up. But anyway, it was a useful course. But I do remember outlining my plans for the Abendau series, and this poor writing tutor, who probably didn't do science fiction fantasy, came back to me and said, it's a bit ambitious. And I kind of tried to write Abendau a couple of times, in my teens and early 20s, and then I stopped for 20 years and can honestly say I wrote nothing and didn't miss it and didn't feel I had an itch to scratch. And then the year I was due to turn 40, I had a bit of time over the summer. I was working in an education-based job, and I thought, well, I'll take those 3 months and write the novel.
Brilliant.
So, yeah, and then about 4 years later, I published it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So that's amazing. Then that was always there, that story in the background ticking over.
Yeah, and it was an important story for me. And whilst it's not the book I'm known for, and it's also not the book I promote very much, and in fact, I may take it out from under my name eventually and put it under its own separate name, because it's so different from everything else I write now. It was very important to me to get that story out there. I didn't have a happy school time, and I would have used the characters very much as escapism from when you didn't maybe want to engage too much with what was going on around you. So it was important to me to get that out. And interestingly, because, you know, although it's space opera, I often think an awful lot of my Northern Irish themes are in that book. They're just invisible. Yeah. So I think for me, it was important to get that out there and get it out in good time and good order.
Yeah.
So, but yeah.
Yeah. So what came after, or was there a bit of a gap again then where you didn't write, or was that just you had the bug and you were?
Oh no, once I started writing, that was it. Yeah, I just went for it then. I wrote book 1 of Abendau, and then it went into a big open submissions window. So I couldn't go back to that series while I waited to see what happened. And that's when I thought, well, I want to write something else as well. And I wrote Inish Carraig somewhere around about the time I was writing book 2 of the Abendau series. So actually, book 2 and 3 are much pacier than book 1. And I think that was the influence of writing Inish on it. I'm not actually sure it's a good thing. I think in retrospective expansiveness of book 1 suits the genre better.
Yes.
So I started Inish then during that period. I have to say, everybody thinks I'm a really fast writer, because whenever I went out, I got 5 books out in very short order. But it's now been 4 years since I published anything, apart from short stories.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, so
yeah,
you know, because I'm fitting it in around everything else. If I get a chapter a day done, I'm quite happy.
Yes.
I could have 2 books out this year, but I think I'm going to delay one of them to next year, because I want to avoid that same thing of having the wham bam 2 big books out and then a big dearth. I'd rather just slow it down a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'm always writing. I'm always plugging away.
You're always writing. So after Inish Carraig, then you had Waters in the Wild.
Yeah. So Inish Carraig came out along with the Abendau series. It was my second book, and then 2 and 3 of the Abendau series came out, and then Waters in the Wild, which is very different from the rest of my books because it's fantasy. I do write a lot of fantasy short stories, but also because calling it a fantasy book, I don't think entirely represents the book. It's probably more to do with mental disruption and the impact of that on families than anything to do with the fantasy elements might or might not be real. And you know, people always ask me, which is it? For me, probably, I don't know. I'm still on the fence.
Yeah.
But the whole thing is that you could read it as a person with mental disruption, or you could read it as a person who's seeing fairies. Whereas my next fantasy book is very much firmly in the fantasy genre, which I think is a good thing, because it's always very hard to sell a book that crosses over genres. Waters in the Wild should be much more widely accessible than it is, but the fantasy element puts some readers off, and the mental health element puts fantasy readers off. So it's kind of just sits in a wee limbo. But of all my books, it's the one it's an odd one. Inish Carraig is by far the most popular. Yeah, I mean, that book, no matter where I go, that's what people want to talk about. There was something about that little story that grasped people's attention, and they liked it, and you know, they keep asking me for a sequel.
Is that coming?
Let's move on from the sequel.
Okay.
It's supposed to be next on my list to do. but there is a worry that one may get in there before it. I do want to get to it. It's another interesting one. Inish Carraig is a crossover. So I do waffle and go from here there to everywhere. So
no, but I love this, Joe, because I know I'm quite a prolific writer, and I go between writing a series and writing short stories and writing this and that. So I love that, and I always feel like is that wrong? Or you talk to some people and I get the impression they think that she's got too much going on, or how can you give that all the attention? So I love that you're coming from that kind of mind frame of, you have all these ideas, and I think it's a lovely place, a lucky place to be as a writer.
I think it keeps you fresh, which is nice. I think if you keep writing the same thing time and time again, you get stuck in the formula. And I can honestly say I don't have a formula. I mean, I suppose Abendau were a bit formulaic. And, they were an idea that was 20 years in the making, so they're probably not the freshest one I have. But no, what I realised with Inish Carraig, so Inish Carraig is a crossover novel, and at one point we had an agent who was a young adult agent with it, and they made it much more young adult than it actually is, the final version. They took out a lot of the policeman Henry story. He only came in at the end when he was really needed for the narrative, because he could see things the main character couldn't see, because he's incarcerated in this alien prison by then. I'm working on the sequel then. I was working on it as if it was a continuation of this crossover story. And actually what occurred to me, and a lot of people will like this here because, I do get a lot of comments saying, of all the characters we liked Carter, the policeman, best. And as I've been writing this here, and I've got most of Nita's story written and about half of John's story written. And for most of Inish Carraig too, Henry has been offside. And then I started to realise that actually it's Henry's story this is, even though John's the main character in Inish Carraig 1. And actually it is just called Inish Carraig 2. We've tried all sorts of different things, and I think it is just Inish Carraig 2.
Okay, yeah.
That's what it is. So now that I've got it into my mind where the direction of the story actually is, which is this internal moral dilemma of Henry. I do love my tortured 30-year-old blokey heroes for some reason. They all turn up with lots of baggage and, baggy-eyed and whatnot. So now that I know that focus, I'm hoping that will get me past, not the block that I've had so much as that I've never felt I've fully formed out everything I needed.
Yeah.
Whereas now that I think I know that it should be Henry, but it's taken me 2 years of subconsciously letting it bubble on to get to that moment where I walked down the road one day and stopped and went, it's Henry's story.
Yeah.
So it's interesting.
Away there in the background, and it all comes, and you surprise yourself.
Yeah, I think it's nice more writing than I do. Yeah, definitely. So I'm hoping to get that more finished than it is, and as I say, about half of it is done. I feel like you might not know him, Pat Rufus, who wrote The Name of the Wind, very famous fantasy novel, book 1 and book 2, massive sellers. Unfortunately, he's been working for 10 years now on the sequel, and there's absolutely no sign of this coming out. His editor says she's seen nothing from him from years. And I'm starting to feel a bit like that with Inish Carraig, because I keep saying to the people who want it, it is coming and I am working at it, but it just never ever seems to actually fall into place. So I'm hoping next time I go for it, it will.
Yeah. I think it will. You're saying about your short stories are more fantasy. Would you write short stories often, or would there be a short story? Not to give you more work, Joe, because I'm plenty on, but is there a collection in the offing, do you think?
Well, I have a collected one which is up on Kindle only, because the formatting of the paperback is terrible, because I did it myself. So I don't. There's five physical copies exist of it in the world,
okay.
And that's it. And the reason for that is quite good fun actually, because I'm involved with the TitanCon convention, and a couple of years ago we were just about to go on a holiday whenever the t-shirts came out for release, and I sort of said, look, I'll buy one whenever I get back, because I don't want to be committing out money and then going on holiday next week. And one of the girls said, no, I'll get it for you. And I said, well, you can't get me the t-shirt and not give you anything back. And she says, you can give me a book. No. And I said, which one? And she says, well, the only one I haven't read is Flash, your short stories. And I was like, oh jeebus, don't actually have that there. So I produced 5 to give her one.
Yeah.
And my mum has one. My mum has my complete collection. She's the only one who has the complete collection. I give her the books rather than me, 9 times out of 10. And I have one somewhere. I have one that I use for events whenever you've got readings, because there's lots of different stories in it, and sometimes you have to change at the last minute, or suddenly you find out they're a reader short and they need an extra reader. So I often bring it with me for that flexibility. So it's out there, and it's a collection of short stories, some of which will only appeal to the lovers of the world. A lot of sci-fi fantasy is about the world, some of which have been, you know, online or in anthologies, and the rights are now back with me, and some of which were original to the book. So,
excellent.
Yeah. So
okay, I'm going to go and download this straight away.
A lot of them are flash fiction, actually. So they are, because I do flash fiction competitions. So a lot of them were the fun flash fiction. So it's very quirky, and I certainly don't promote it on a commercial basis. But if anybody wants to read any of the short stuff, it is there.
Okay, excellent.
And then I had one in the Underneath the Tree anthology.
Yes, which you did. Your Christmas story, yes, it's beautiful.
Yeah, I always wanted to write something about Orion, because whenever I was a teenager, I read a great book about a couple of kids seeking freedom, and they used Orion to steer by. And Orion is the winter star, the winter constellation. It's only in our skies from November. So I always wanted to do something, so that was quite nice. I hopefully have another one coming out in an anthology this year, which is a bit of a sexy fae one. There's fae, and I've done the sex in it, and then they said, oh, we're not sure if it should be family friendly, and I was like, oops. But it turns out it didn't need to be, so that's okay. So hopefully that's coming out this year, and yeah, it's just finding time, isn't it?
It is. And how do you find now at the minute in lockdown? Are you able to write or read, or is it affecting your creativity at all?
Hasn't affected my creativity. In fact, if anything, I've been quite good that way. There's been no problem with the ideas. There really is. And it's time. I don't know how in lockdown I'm still so busy. You know, I have this morning. This afternoon I have a Zoom meeting. Tomorrow I have 2 or 3 things on. So how supposedly we've got all this time? I have no time. So I'm still at my chapter a day, sort of plodding along. But I'm about 20 pages away off the end of an edit. And then I will have some publisher edits for the one coming out in November, which will be due quite soon. We've done the first round, so we should be knocking the skittles down quite nicely. And then hopefully Inish Carraig too, unless, as I say, something else takes precedence, which will depend on whether or not, you know, an awful lot of writing does consist of, is there a market, is it expected, is there a deadline? You know, I mean, I would love to go back and write the prequel, the Abendau. It's my world. I absolutely love it. It's my sandbox, but I've never had time to do Abendau again, you know. It might happen.
Yeah, I have this little vision of you in the bookshop, you know, if it's quiet writing. Does that ever happen?
Oh, yeah.
Can you do that?
So the bookshop's actually my husband's, and I'm the general dog's buddy who turns up to help out. And I turn up in all the videos and all, because I don't mind talking. He's not so keen. And yes, often on a quiet day, I would say to him, do you know what? I will go in and I'll cover it and let you maybe go and do whatever work you need to do, you know, for it, because we run quite a big bargain room, and he would do a lot of the buying for that. So he would have a lot of, you know, sort of collections and all to do. So if there's a quiet rainy day, because we're in an outdoor courtyard, you can nearly guarantee on a cold, wet, rainy day, you'll be lucky to see, you know, a couple of faces. So on that day, I will quite happily go in and sit at the little writing desk in our staff room, which is just behind the till, so I can hear anybody coming in and out. I bought it last year on Facebook Marketplace. I love Facebook Marketplace. It cost me a fortune in lockdown. It's just so ridiculous. Anyway, somebody around the corner was selling a little old-fashioned writing desk, and they're normally quite expensive. But they're selling it for nearly nothing. So I now have that in the shop. So yes, I do sit there in the shop, tapping away. And then turn up, sell books, go back to writing books.
That's just idyllic, I think. And that where you are based is in Carrickfergus, I should say. It's just, you know, it's a gorgeous drive. I love going up to the shop, and then it's beautiful inside. You've got your, you know, your different zones. We'll talk about that, I suppose, in a wee sec. But the courtyard is beautiful. And just the paint, the color of the paints of the, you know, the buildings, it's like pastel colors. It's really pretty setting.
Yeah, they did a facelift last year. So I mean, we're up a set of stairs, so it's almost like you go into another little world within this complex, which is just along by Maud's. That's what everybody knows in Carraig is Maud's, past the Castle and Reach Maud's. We're in this little complex of shops, and there's gift shops and a deli. We've got a Mexican.
Oh,
and a couple of other new shops opening as well. So we are in the garden. I mean, I'm from Carrick, and I always wanted to open a bookshop in the courtyard. And that's what we have. And it's a very quirky little shop with a series of rooms, as you say. Yeah, it's a little bit different.
A beautiful children's area, don't you? And you've crime, and you've your sci-fi room as well.
One of the things that we know is that children's books do well traditionally sold, because people don't want to read off a Kindle to their kids. Most parents are trying to get them off the screen. But I didn't just want to run a children's bookstore, tempting as that is, you know. Mm-hmm. So this property gave us the opportunity to actually give a full-size children's room, and it is a good-sized children's room, as well as the main room. And Chris then said, you know, we need a bargain room, because every book buyer likes a wee bargain. And I have to say the bargain room is its own almost micro business.
Yeah. That was a genius idea by Chris. You know, I love going into.
Yeah, and he has a eye for books, you know. Chris and I go into the same place, and I come out with a couple of, you know, used paperbacks, and he comes out with a first edition Seamus Heaney, and I'm like, I didn't even see that.
Damn right.
So it sits in perfectly. And then we have what we would call the showroom, which is, you know, sort of the new books, little gift nook, not an awful lot, but, you know, sort of literary thing nooks. And then we used to have a geek den, but we made that the crime room, and now the sci-fi fantasy is hidden at the end of the corridor. And both seem to like it better. The crime quite like having this little room to the side. And yeah. We've got our own place away from everybody else. So it's funny how these things evolve. Yes. I mean, we opened in January last year, and at the time we opened, there was some talk of a virus emerging in China. But I suppose, like everybody else, we were thinking this is maybe like SARS or MERS and will burn itself out. And then within 6 weeks of opening, we were closed. And we were closed for 3 months. And now we're closed again for another 3 months. Mm-hmm. So I think by the time, you know, sort of April comes around, we will have spent 6 months of our first year closed. Yeah. So it's very hard to tell yet, is it a viable business? It's hard to tell yet. You know, we've been able to run about 3 events and then had to stop. And I have no idea when events will restart. We are a small space. So I wouldn't see any events, apart from maybe something small and intimate, until after, you know, the stage 5 restrictions end. Mm-hmm. Certainly stage 4. So it's quirky, but you know what? We've had a blast, and people are really supportive, and we've had to be creative, and we've got like... for World Book Day this year, we're not open. We were last year, but we hadn't got the books or anything in stock. Mm-hmm. So we've set up like a little walking trail through Carrick and through Whitehead for the kids to do. And we've just taken them down one of the local parks, and there's like a picture of a hedgehog on the wall, and we've got to find Miss Tiggywinkle on the walk and whatnot. And that's gone down really well. And kids are doing that there. And whenever they come in, we've got probably a prize or a wee book or something for them whenever they come in. When we reopen. So you have to be creative.
Yeah, I know you have to be creative, I suppose, and you were making the videos as well. Yes. And whenever you were able to reopen, you know, of local writers, and that was fantastic to be able to see. And it was the first thing, was that in July?
That's right, yeah.
It was self and Sharon Dempsey went up and, you know, we had an interview, and it was just a bit of flipping normality. It was wonderful. And we have a bookshop.
We have a couple planned for when we can get back in. At the minute, listen, legally we could probably do it. I think if it was socially distanced, but there is also something about the spirit of the rules as well. I think in these sort of times where we should pull together, and I think the spirit of the rules says no, not at the minute, but we do have a couple lined up, hopefully, for whenever we kind of, it becomes okay, come together.
So you have got your own writing, you know, you've got the bookshop there where, you know, you're helping Chris out, and
Yeah.
you've got, you know, your videos, you're a great person who, you know, to kind of help and support local writers and, you know, in the community. But you wrote a blog post last week or the week before maybe, and I was like, wow, I have to talk to Joe about this. It was fantastic. And it was about being a writer and being a writer in Northern Ireland and what that means to you, or what it maybe doesn't mean to you.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, the seed of that blog, there's a couple of things fed into it. My blogs are often just, I've got something on my mind, just bang it out. I very rarely review them. I don't sit on them. I just put them out and hope to goodness I haven't offended someone, which is, you know, always a bit of a danger with blogs. But I mean, a couple of years ago, myself and R.B. Kelly, Rachel Kelly, who wrote Edge of Heaven, which is a great sci-fi dystopian book, did an event together, and she defines herself as a science fiction writer from Northern Ireland, whereas I define myself as a Northern Irish writer of science fiction. Okay. So it's just that very small distinction. We both have Northern Irish influences in our work. We both write science fiction, but for me, most of what I write is actually led by Northern Ireland. Yeah, which is slightly different. And then from that there, so you know, it came then to the whole, so I suppose the Belfast noir scene, where there's been, you know, which is such a fabulous scene, and so many really, really creative authors like yourself, like Sharon, Simon Maltman, Adrian McKenty, who's literally from down the road from me, literally, and I went to the same school. You know, there's Steve Kavanagh, there's that lovely, 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 vibrant scene. But it took me back to whenever I submitted Inish Carraig, and the agent read over it for the first time. And well, I think it was about the third time actually, because we'd had some coming and going, some changes before we got to that point of saying, yes, we're working this together. And one of the things she said to me was that what struck her was the lack of references to Northern Ireland that people would expect and would be looking for. And I took that to a forum that I'm on, and I said, what do you think whenever I say Northern Ireland? And it came back with petrol bombs and the Troubles and, you know, police cars getting blown up and whatnot. And it occurs to me that an awful lot of the literature that I read from Northern Ireland is about the Troubles, is about post-Troubles, has shady paramilitaries, you know. And I don't know about anybody else, but I don't actually tend to know very many shady paramilitaries that I know of. I might know hundreds of them, but you know, my thought was most of us are actually quite boring in our, you know, in our life. It's like saying to everybody who's from a city that has a racial problem that, you know, they must have that, or that must be what defines them, or everyone, you know, who's in a city that has a drug problem, that suddenly everybody must know the local sleazy drug dealer. You know, it's not reality. So and then what came to me then was, whenever Inish Carraig came out, the odd negative comment I get is it's a very poor analogy to the Northern Ireland Troubles. And it is, because it was actually written to be nothing about the Northern Ireland Troubles or anything. Now there is a fellow in it who we know is probably connected somewhere, because you've got to take your bad guys from something and they have to be realistic. So we're in this sort of double-edged sword. But at the same time, I don't want to write books that hark back to that past, whilst also writing books that are entirely grounded in that past. And I suppose I'm lucky because I'm in a genre where you can go and throw it out the window and throw the aliens in there instead. So it's a really interesting one, and something I've been thinking a lot about where I sit as a Northern Irish author. I mean, growing up, I was introduced to one Northern Irish writer of science fiction. Now, I'm an avid sci-fi reader, and I'm an avid literature reader. The only sci-fi from Northern Ireland I was introduced to was C.S. Lewis's space trilogy, Cosmic Trilogy, which is fantastic, but has nothing to do with Northern Ireland. There's no themology. And then as I became more involved in the fan scene, actually, and started going to conventions, I started to get introduced to the likes of Ian MacDonald, who writes fabulous science fiction and who is barely known in Northern Ireland. And I think Ian would say he'd like it to stay that way, thanks. And then I got introduced to our legacy writers, people like James White, and Bob Shaw, and these people are renowned across the world. Yeah, there are conventions in their name, there are awards in their name, there are panels held in America about the work of James White. And they wrote stuff about Northern Ireland, not always directly about Northern Ireland, and some of it wasn't about Northern Ireland, and yet they are erased from the canon of Northern Irish literature.
Yeah.
And to me, that's just, it says something really quite sad about our ability to accept the unnatural. And where this has gone off kilter again, sorry, Kelly, where that there is really stark is that in things like post-Troubles, in things like divided society, we see, for instance, Afrofuturism, which is like, everybody goes, what's that there? So I say it's Black Panther, where you take the culture of Africa and you put it into an entirely different speculative setting in order to explore elements that are important to that culture,
yeah,
in a new way. We should have a strong reflective mirror. We have post-conflict, and yet it's erased. It's a whole way of writing and a safe place of writing that's taken away. So I suppose what I was exploring in the blog was why I didn't write conventional Northern Irish stuff, and yet still very much see myself as a Northern Irish writer, and why, unfortunately, in not writing the conventional Northern Irish stuff, I'm largely always going to be overlooked as a Northern Irish writer. So it's a really strange little paradigm going on there.
Yeah. No, it was fascinating, and even though I write crime and I write about the paramilitaries and I'm drawn to it, but I think that whenever there's a TV show being made, and there's a lot at the minute, you know, if it's set in Northern Ireland, it's very much those things, and I would love, and I'm saying this as someone who, you know, watches those things and enjoys them, but you know, it's this kind of thing is, you know, if it's set in Northern Ireland, it's set here because it's cheap. Yes. It's small, it's quick to get to the sea, it's quick to, you know, have a mountain behind you. It's, you know, it has these different reasons, but it doesn't always have to be about those things, as you're saying, and be so heavy with the dialect, or where it doesn't feel, you know, it doesn't feel authentic. Yes. Then it's, you know, everything is so heavy-handed in a way. Not everything, but
and it's no reflection on the writers who do choose to set, because we all have our source material and we all deal with it our own way. It's more a reflection on my part on the marketing, the fact that people sort of feel, TV companies and whatnot, as if to say, if we're going to do something about Northern Ireland, it has to have this in it, or people won't be interested.
Yeah.
You know, because I do think there's, you know, I'm not stupid. We are post-conflict. It's in there bubbling under us, and the generation of writers, yourself and myself and whatnot, a tail end of the Troubles writers. We were brought up through the Troubles and through the peace process, and have much reflection there. Mm-hmm. So I think it's very much up to the individual writer, and I totally take my hat off to those who have the bravery to actually take it on head first, because I won't. I hide behind all sorts of things in the sci-fi world, but I just feel that we shouldn't have to feel that we have to make our work or overtly about that, just to feel that we are seen as Northern Irish.
Yes, I completely agree. We can get away from a lot of these cliches and stereotypes. Yeah. How do you think? Yeah. How do you think? You know, you're talking about your influences, you know, or the lack of influences in your genre growing up here. How do you think it's going to be for kids nowadays who are growing up? Do you think it's changed?
So there's an interesting thing there, science fiction and fantasy, but particularly I am primarily a science fiction writer, although my next novel's fantasy, and science fiction is huge in terms of popularity, in terms of accessibility. Things like Marvel and whatnot, you know, they're massive franchises. So I think, and one of the things that I'm involved with is a group called Otherworlds NI, which is a group that brings together a lot of the speculative writers in Northern Ireland and seeks to cross-promote and cross-support and all that there. And I think we will continue to see new writers in the genre, which is important. Where I think there is still a wall, and I have to say people like Damien Smith and the Arts Council have been so supportive in trying to break this down, which is brave when you're running an Arts Council in a land of poets, if you like, and playwrights, is mainstream acceptance of the genre. Places to get reviews. The only ever reviews I've had in mainstream press in Northern Ireland have been atrocious because they are by readers who don't read science fiction and don't know and love the genre, and probably see it as a bit cheesy and a bit, sort of easy to write. Anyone who thinks science fiction is easy to write doesn't know the genre, because it's an incredibly hard genre to write, actually. And just opportunities and whatnot. Now, I have been very lucky. I've had tons of support. People just like the Crescent Arts Centre, C.S. Lewis Festival, East Belfast Arts, Women Allowed NI have put no barriers up to me being Northern Irish, but I am still often, unless I drag Biddy Lee and Rachel along, then we're like the three little geek writers. But too often we are still there as the single writer or the single voice, and I'm sure there are people who dread to see my tweets occasionally, because I will be the one saying, take magical realism for instance. Magical realism is quite a big scene now in Northern Ireland and is recognised, but none of the genre writers are recognised as part of that scene, and that is madness, because magical realism touches on to fantasy. If you take something like Waters in the Wild, it's closer to magical realism than it is fantasy. If you take something like Ian MacDonald's Desolation Road, which is a science fiction novel, but has strong elements of magical realism, yet at no point is this literary movement seeking to come together or to share or to celebrate that elements that exist within the genre community. And I said it at the World Science Fiction Convention last year, which was in Dublin, not last year, year before. They actually said it in front of a panel of people, that we have an entire scene of magical realism that doesn't include one single actual genre writer. And the room burst out laughing at the very concept of that.
Oh, you're so right, Jo. I never saw it until now.
And I hope it doesn't tread on toes, because that's not what I'm about. I'm not knocking that scene has developed separately. I'm not knocking any of the writers at all. I think I've read them all and I think they're fabulous. What I am knocking, if you like, is this sense that we can't combine as literature and see the merits and the linkages between each. It really irks me whenever people put science fiction in this almost like it's its own place. I'm sure you get it with crime sometimes, but I think you have managed to make a wee sort of recognised genre there, which, has its place. But it really irks me whenever people sort of go, oh, that's over there. When we're writing about...
I think it's maybe just, well, I don't know, you're better placed to tell me, obviously, but I think it's just a little bit behind where we were with crime fiction. Whenever my first book came out nearly 6 years ago, I would be on a panel with, the men in the crime scene, and they're all lovely, really nice people and everything. And I would always get asked, are you the only woman writing crime in Northern Ireland? And I was thinking, no, how could I be? But I didn't know. And then someone would say, put up their hand, and no, there's Katrina King, who I hadn't heard of, and she's written about 23 books. So since then, I got in touch with her. I found Sharon was writing, Carrie Buchanan's going to, have her book, right? There's Claire Allen, so I think it's, and I had said at that time, no, I would never for a minute think that I am, and even some people thought that book was more literary than crime, but I knew it was written a crime series. So anyway, I just see science fiction and fantasy coming to the forefront now with you and Biddy and Rachel, and women, young girls who are maybe into science fiction, and now they have your books to look to. It's not just the boys club too, which I'm excited to see. And as you'd said to me before, because I wasn't really a science fiction reader, but I am coming around a lot more, but it's always a human story at the heart of it. You know, and it is difficult to write. Whenever I read yourself or, Biddy or Rachel, I'm like, I sent them messages as well and I said to you, I'm in awe because you're not just writing a story, but you're not just using the setting, but you've created this whole world, and it's just a crazy amount of talent to me. I think you more power to all of you all, and you deserve more recognition.
I think as well, there is, we have over 100 in this group of Otherworlds people, and that came about because I was running classes and people kept telling me nobody wrote science fiction in Northern Ireland and fantasy, and I was filling a class every term of people writing exactly that. And then I went to the Belfast Writers Group one night to do a thing on dialogue, which had nothing to do with science fiction and fantasy, and 2/3 of them were writing that. And, none of them were connected. But because I was out there a wee bit and, I'm mouthy and I turn up everywhere, I kind of started to connect with people in different little pockets. And so I formed Otherworlds, which is a self-generated group. It's not my group. It's not anything other than a group that gives its own sort of energy. And there are some fantastic writers coming up through, both male and female. And I think that's one thing about sci-fi. We're also underrepresented. That we're all kind of all in it together. Yes. And actually the genre world tends to try its very best these days to promote women. Now there is still fandom. Fandom is a different matter. Fandom can be very toxic. But that's not the writing community that I know in Ireland, who, both the chairs of the two Irish conventions are women. The outgoing chairs are women. Yeah. So we're much more embedded within the scene, which is great and recognized. So for me, it's an all across, just the idea that, the greats that are recognized worldwide aren't recognized here. It's just yeah. Yeah. But I remember talking to another writer about this here, and they said, well, that's not my battle. And they're right. It's up to us to drive that energy through in terms of recognition. And I'm one voice amongst many. And as I say, the Arts Council and whatnot are very supportive. So that's fantastic that they're on board. Yeah. But yeah, hopefully, whenever I see the talent coming up through, I hope there'll be an explosion in the next sort of 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. I think there will be. Whenever Claire Savage and myself were putting together the anthology, the Christmas anthology, and of course, we had your story. We really wanted to have a story by you in there. And you were the only commission, but we wanted it to be genre. And, I come from a bit of a literary kind of background as well, but a lot of anthologies coming through, it's the same name, same kind of story, same themes. And we wanted to kind of to mix it up, and we were blown away seeing how many submissions we got. And then you start to really see, wow, there's so many people writing dystopia, science fiction, or crime writers that, I hadn't, seen before.
It's the breadth of the genre. You can write a book about anything and put it in science fiction and fantasy. That's the beautiful thing about it. That story was quite funny because I don't write a lot of science fiction stories. Mm-hmm. Most of mine are very soft because I'm more interested in the characters and what's driving them, and using the science fiction as a place to explore that. So of course I started to come up with this story, and it started to go down its usual science fiction fantasy element. And I remember coming to you and saying, does this have to be sci-fi? Can it have some fantasy? You said, no, sci-fi. Now I know, dear. I have a very patient forum of people who I belong to, who have some scientists in there, being a sci-fi forum, who know that I am the world's worst scientist. And I'll not spoil how I did it, but I had to go to them and say, guys, I've got to get DNA. Indian salad cluster. Anyone get any ideas? And actually the way to do it came from them, because I don't have a clue how to insert DNA. Yeah. So they were fantastic in that, and they just laugh at me and go, right, okay, what Sophie's science question have you got today, Joe? So that was quite funny, because I was like, oh dear, I've written myself into a corner again.
But you're always, that's a great thing about the community too, isn't it? You know, there's always someone to give you a bit of help with your research or.
Oh yeah, we're very lucky in Northern Ireland. The community of writers is very close, even though, you know, I'm sort of rumbling about other bits and pieces. It's in fact only the closeness that allows you to put that criticism out there, because you are friends with these writers. So, you know, they know if you turn around and say, you know, there's a disconnect in the scene, that you're not saying it to be bitchy or anything, because we've talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I've said it openly and I'm saying it openly again here. There's none of this sort of behind the scenes, you know, sort of hidden agendas that I find. Maybe that's just me.
No, that's it, isn't it? That's from doing the panels and having those discussions, and everybody knows, I think, you know, where the feelings are and where we need to work harder, and it's just reading more broadly. And
I have dry eyes, so I'm not looking at a screen for a while. I can set it off. That's all going on here. Is it? It's a stream.
Well, I think that kind of brings us to a close anyway. So thanks very much, Jo, for chatting with me today. It's been lovely to see you.
It's lovely to see you. I just wish that, you know, we could all be together in a room with a couple of coffees sitting at the back, and, you know, the hugs that are going to be had through the writers, you know, is going to be immense whenever we're able to.
Yeah.
6 months squished.
Yeah.
And I mean, and it's just lovely to be talking about, you know, some of the people that are coming up through. Kerry's a really interesting writer, Kerry Buchanan. I'm delighted to see her first novel coming out. I know as a fantasy writer, and then suddenly she's in crime, and that's what I love. And that's why I don't think we should have boxes. And I think it's important if a writer like that wants to go off and do a fantasy project, they can do.
Yeah.
Do a crime, they can do.
Yeah.
So I'm excited.
That's it. It's not having that open-mindedness in your reading and your writing, and not boxing it off as well.
Yeah, because we don't need to be boxed off, you know. But and occasionally I do actually write the odd non-weird thing, just not very often. But occasionally.
Well, I'm going right now to download your short stories, because that was a lovely surprise for me. I didn't know they existed.
Some are better than others, but as I say, they were largely there for me to have something to read from, and sometimes you want something funny and sometimes you want something. So there's all sorts in there. There's a real mix of stories. Yeah. So it's lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too.
All right.
Thanks, Jo.
Bye. Bye.